Thanks for recording. Hi there, George DeMet. Welcome to Managing Conflict in Drupal and Beyond. A little bit of background for folks who don't know me. I'm the founder and CEO of Palantir.net. We're a full-service digital agency based here in Chicago, but kind of distributed all over the country. We work with Drupal, obviously, and other open source technologies. Okay, I think Kevin's system's still working. We had a little flicker there. In addition to to my work at Palantir, very involved in the Drupal community, and one of the ways that I'm helping out right now is I chair the Drupal community working group, and so I'm going to be talking a little bit about that work later in the presentation, but also kind of talking about conflict at sort of a kind of a broader level as well. So first off, I just want to throw that question out there, and this can be interactive if people have answers. What do you think of when you think of conflict? Anyone want to? Oh, come on.
Okay.
I know Leslie's got an idea. She's looking at me.
When people disagree, when people have different opinions.
Yep.
Any of those things.
That's good. What do we think about when we hear the word conflict? What kind of feelings do we have?
Tension.
Tension. Yep.
Anger.
Okay. Some negative emotions. Does anyone have any positive feelings when they think about conflict? Discussion. I like that. Solutions. Okay. So there's some good answers. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm defining conflict as something that arises from an incompatibility between two or more opinions, principles, or interests, right? And conflict can be either positive or negative. So let's talk a little bit about what positive conflict is, right? Positive conflict can contribute to a cross-pollination of ideas, right? We talked about that before. Discussion can challenge people's pre-existing conceptions about things, right? If you're in an organization where, folks are doing things because that's kind of the way we've always done them, and someone wants to challenge that, that is actually a form of conflict. Can help people find creative solutions, Leslie said, solutions to problems and generate innovation, right? It can help clear the air between team members, raise issues for clarification, resolution, increase communication. So, if you're working on a team, and there's just something that people aren't saying, right? There's like some kind of tension, mistrust, and sometimes you just need to get it out in the open, and that also is a form of conflict. And ultimately, if conflict is handled well, it can help people find common ground, build trust, and improve relationships. And I think, the key here is, understanding what that means, right? And just because one has a conflict doesn't mean that they can't engage in that discussion in a respectful way, right? So Margaret Heffernan says, for good ideas and true innovation, you need human interaction, conflict, argument, and debate, right? This is fundamentally about human beings sharing ideas. Well, and on the other side, we have negative conflict, right? And so this can be a waste of time, resources, and productivity if you're arguing instead of doing. Very frequently, when conflict is driven out of self-interest, it can derail the larger goals of your organization, and that's not good. If conflict is not handled in a positive and respectful way, it damages relationships between colleagues. And ultimately, that leads to a toxic working environment, right? So these are the things we want to avoid. And in my experience, negative conflict is fundamentally about unmet needs, right? I don't feel heard. I don't feel like my contributions are valued. my interests aren't being represented, or I feel hurt by something that someone else said or did. And these are all things that, I can tell you that with our group, work in the community working group, we hear all of those things. And I think anyone who has probably worked in the Drupal project for any amount of time is, probably at some point or other experienced one or more of those feelings, right? Particularly in an environment where we have to make decisions, right, about, are we going to accept this patch? Are we going to, choose this framework over another? Decisions have to be made, and if there are two competing interests, often, one is going to prevail over the other. So if you don't feel heard, if you don't feel like your contributions matter, you're going to feel left out, you're going to feel frustrated, and that's going to lead to forms of negative conflict, right? So these are literally the kinds of issues that come up all the time. This is how negative conflict manifests in Drupal and in other open source projects as well, right? So technical disagreements that end up turning into personal attacks, right? You only wanted to use, that framework because, it benefits your business interests, for example, or something like that, or you're against this because you're against anything that I ever bring to the table, no matter how technically, correct it might be, right? Frustration with the amount of time it takes to review patches or project applications. We've actually been making a little bit of progress on this front. The Drupal.org team and others in the community have been working to, particularly on the project application side, to make it easier to create new projects on Drupal.org. But we still see frustration, particularly with patch reviews, right? We have comes up all the time, right? It's like, so-and-so didn't approve my patch quickly enough, so I wouldn't fork their module, right? And that leads to hurt feelings. And, people lashing out at each other in the issue queues. Again, another kind of form of frustration. Could be for technical reasons, could be for any kind of reason. And then what we also see is when people are angry or frustrated, that often manifests outside of the immediate project space, right? So, whether that's on social media or, sometimes in Slack, we see people, getting into fights with each other, harassing, trolling, having negative interactions. So, this slide right here, this is from a 2016 survey that Community Working Group took of Drupal contributors. We asked them about their experiences during the Drupal 8 development cycle. We asked them a whole bunch of questions, but this was one that I thought was particularly relevant. So was it just over 60% of folks who responded to our survey, and this was a little over 100 people, but it was a lot of sort of high-profile Drupal core and contributors, and just a shade over 60% said that they had experienced or observed some sort of conflict, on Drupal.org in the issue queues or in Slack during the Drupal 8 development cycle. And what I found really interesting about that is that it actually matches fairly closely with another study that the folks at GitHub did last year, and they actually, it's not just projects on GitHub, but they actually worked with academic researchers and brought in data from a lot of different projects, and they found that 18% of folks in their survey had personally experienced a negative interaction with another user in open source, but that 50% had witnessed one that occurred between other people. So this is, conflict is everywhere. And as a result of that, we see some consequences, right? That we see a decline in contributor morale, decline, obviously, in productivity. People leaving the project, right? We don't have numbers for Drupal, but again, from that GitHub survey, about 21% of the people who had experienced or witnessed negative behavior said that they actually stopped contributing to the project because of it, right? And it can also deter people from joining Drupal or other open source projects. So this is a problem that we need to address. We need to be aware of, we need to talk about it, we need to address it. And it has an impact on, ultimately what the picture of people who are contributing to our project looks like, right? So in that GitHub survey, they found that only 3% of open source code contributors were women. So in Drupal, we're actually doing twice as good because we have 6%. Which I'm not celebrating that, but it's interesting. And even at our in-person events, right, DrupalCon and other events, we're lucky if 20% of attendees are women, right? So we have a major gender balance issue. We also literally have, and I spent a lot of time preparing for this, trying to find some good numbers on percentage of people of color in open source, and couldn't find any. There's like no good data on it. The best data I could find was, again, from that GitHub open source survey where 16% of people, now this is an international survey, so 16% of people in that survey identified themselves as racial or ethnic minorities in their own country, right? So in the United States, so that's somewhere between 38 to 40% of people identify as minorities, which, so if it's only 16% in open source, assuming those are primarily folks from the United States, that's not a great number. So one of the reasons we have such an imbalance, right, is that women are far more likely than men to encounter language or content that makes them feel uncomfortable. They're far more likely to encounter stereotyping, and they're far more likely to encounter unsolicited sexual advantages, right? Or advances, sorry. As a result, unsurprisingly, women are also far more likely than men to seek out help from people that they already know, as opposed to asking for help from strangers in a public forum or channel, right? Now, any of you who are working in open source contribution, you know that collaboration between strangers is kind of one of the fundamental things, that makes open source so remarkable, right? And we're all striving to build these communities where everyone can feel welcome to participate. And it's even more striking when you consider that GitHub pull requests by women are far more likely to be merged than those made by men. But that's true, I think Kelsey's probably seen this study, that's true only if their gender can't be easily identified from their profile, right? So it's also really important when you think about this in terms of what open source means for people's careers, right? So half of contributors say that their open source work was somewhat or very important in getting their current role. Open source helps people build a professional reputation, and it helps build their careers, build their resume. So improving contributor representation actually can help create a more representative tech sector overall. The big point I'm trying to make here is that reducing negative conflict helps make open source more welcoming, more inclusive, and more innovative. So how do we do that? So one thing that a lot of open source projects have is a code of conduct, right? And you can see up on the slide here, I have a picture of a code of conduct. This is not from an open source project. This is actually the sign that they have up at Navy Pier here in Chicago. So they have a code of conduct that's posted. And actually, you know, almost any venue that serves the public has some sort of code of conduct posted that sets expectations for people so that they don't engage in unsafe behavior that interferes with the ability of others to use that space, right? In its simplest form, a code of conduct is a policy used by an organization to establish standards for behavior and appropriate conduct when interacting with others in a defined space, be that, you know, conference, be that a workplace, be that a project, be that an event venue, whatever, right? We're here at MidCamp. MidCamp has a code of conduct. It's on the website. It's posted at the registration desk. And that makes it clear that harassment won't be tolerated at this event. It tells folks how they can let event staff or organizers know if they've been subjected to harassing behavior, right? So it fills a really important role, not just at sort of physical spaces where people interact with each other, but also in the context of technology communities, which are virtual in nature. The codes of conduct help create inclusive spaces where people can feel safe and welcome to contribute, right? And again, we know from the research that's been done that documentation that clearly explains a project processes such as how to contribute, what the code of conduct is, are incredibly valued by those groups of folks who are traditionally underrepresented in open source, like women, like people of color, right? So a well-written and well-implemented code of conduct can help address those issues, right? By making it clear that communities value openness and diversity and are committed to providing an inclusive space that's free of harassment where everyone can contribute, right? Now, just having that, just saying that, isn't enough, and it won't get rid of every issue, but it's a way to make sure that everyone understands the ground rules, right? But code of conduct is worthless if there are no structures to support it or mechanisms to enforce it, right? And we see this come up fairly often at events. So events will be like, oh yes, we have a code of conduct because we know we're supposed to have a code of conduct because, a lot of folks will say, I'm not going to speak at an event that doesn't have a code of conduct. So they'll, find something, off the internet, slap it up on their website, and then when an issue comes up, they will have no idea what to do. So it's really important to make sure that you have people at your event who understand what the code of conduct is, who are empowered to handle reports, and who understand and appreciate that responsibility, right? And furthermore, who are folks who attendees, can feel safe talking to, can feel safe approaching, right? And, in some cases it's really clear cut, right? If someone is endangering the physical safety of another attendee, or if they're doing something that's breaking the law or the rules of the venue, the event staff should immediately remove the person from the premises and call the authorities if necessary. But often the answers are not always so clear-cut, and so it's really important that you have people who understand how to handle a situation, who know how to listen, who aren't going to try to troubleshoot or problem solve on the spot, but are going to say, okay, I need to know what happened, who was involved, is everyone okay, and then take that time, take that space, and go and deal with it appropriately. So within the Drupal community, we have a community working group. So there's me, the chair. I've been part of the community working group since its inception, which was actually back in March of 2013. I've been the chair since March of 2016, and so I replaced Donna Benjamin, who had been the previous chair. Also in the group we have Mike Anello, who many of you may know from the Drupal Easy podcast, who's from Florida. We have Adam Hill, who runs a company in the UK called Consultant Design, and does a lot of work in both the UK and Europe. Emma Karianis, who is an awesome Drupal developer, also from the UK. And our newest member, Jordana Fung, who is a Drupal developer based in Suriname, which is, for those, it's a small country on the north coast of South America. And you know, in the past, Angie Byron, WebChick, was a member of the community working group. Rachel Lawson, who's now the community liaison for the Drupal Association, was a member. And Roel de Meester, who was one of the early leaders in the Belgian Drupal community, was also a part of the CWG. So, in addition to the five of us, we also have a number of subject matter experts, right? So these are folks like, it might be a lawyer or someone who is a mental health consultant who we can talk with on an as-needed basis, right? If issues come up that require some kind of specialized knowledge that's not in our wheelhouse, we have folks we can go and talk to and get some kind of additional advice and perspective on, you know, issues that might require specialized knowledge, right? Another thing we do is, you know, at DrupalCons, whenever there's a DrupalCon in a different part of the country or a different part of the world, we try to connect with someone who is local to that region. And so if something comes up, if an issue comes up where there might be a question of whether or not, you know, understanding the incident in the context of the local culture, we can ask that person for their advice and perspective. So, Community Working Group is tasked with maintaining a friendly and welcoming contributor community for the Drupal project. We do that by helping community members resolve conflicts through an established process. We act as a point of escalation, mediation, or final arbitration for the Drupal community in case of intractable conflicts. So, you know, that's essentially upholding the Drupal Community Code of Conduct. That's the code of conduct that you can find on Drupal.org, and I want to be clear, it's distinct from the code of conduct that is in place at DrupalCon or other events. The DrupalCon code of conduct is enforced by the Drupal Association staff. They're the ones who run the event, but we consult with each other on issues as appropriate. You know, so if something comes up at DrupalCon that might have a larger community impact, they're probably going to loop us in on that. We recognize community leadership every year through the Aaron Winborn Award. Aaron Winborn was a very well-known Drupal developer who passed away a couple years ago, had ALS, and so in his memory, in honor of his memory, what we do is we find someone in the community who demonstrates kindness, kind of goes above and beyond for the Drupal community, demonstrating leadership, and we take nominations from the community at large, and then the community working group, in combination with the past award winners, get together and we vote on who gets recognized at the North American DrupalCon and actually gets a free pass and stipend for the event. So in the past, we've recognized Kathy Tees, Gabor Hoichi, and Nikki Stevens. So I talked a little bit before about providing conflict resolution resources and guidance, right? So sometimes, you know, we have folks who might be engaged in a conflict where they're not necessarily looking for us to guide them through the process or engage in mediation. They just kind of want some help or advice, right? So we can help point that to them. When possible, we try to publish stuff, though we don't get to do that as often as we might like. You know, and in general, we do whatever we can to try to help improve the overall health of the Drupal community. Now, that's a big job, and what's important to keep in mind is that, you know, the five of us are volunteers, right? We don't have any funding, we don't have any staff, we don't have a formal relationship with the Drupal Association. We're actually an independent group that's chartered directly by Dries, who currently appoints or approves its members and reviews any appeals of CWG decisions. Now, there's been a lot of talk over the last year about improvements and changes in streamlining community governance, so it's quite possible that that might change in the future, but at least for the last 5 years or so, that's how it's been.
Has anything changed over the last year yet, or is it all forthcoming?
So yeah, I could do a whole other presentation on that, but I'll give you the short version because I'm actually doing okay on time. So there's been a lot of conversations about what governance means in the community, right? And so for those folks who were at DrupalCon Nashville last year, the Drupal Association hired Whitney Hess to come in, and she kind of led some, kind of facilitated some group conversations in person, and then she also facilitated a few online. Following up on that, she kind of released a series of kind of high-level bullet points of kind of areas that needed, she was hearing folks wanted to look at and address. So that was a really great process, and I think it helped people really get their feelings and frustrations out and kind of get them into a form where we could kind of process them all as a community. But it wasn't necessarily particularly actionable, right? It was kind of like, hey, this is what I'm hearing. So the Drupal Association actually kind of did a survey. It's like, should we have maybe some kind of a community governance summit and ask some questions around that? And and again, the answers they got weren't super clear. So they actually came to us, the community working group, and said, hey, can you guys, sort of take the lead on that? And we said, well, we can't take the lead on community governance, but what we can do is help kind of facilitate some additional discussions, online discussions that are really focused around the very specific areas of what do we need to do next with community governance, right? And so we had those happened last fall. We put up, there's a blog post on Drupal.org which kind of goes through the list of bullet points, and and so you can kind of read all those. And again, I could do, and if you're going to be at DrupalCon, we actually have a session about it too. All of us who are there are going to talk about it. I will say that kind of our first level recommendation, top recommendation, was that in order to be able to make changes to community governance, we need to really kind of understand, we need the leadership of the project, right? So that's essentially DREES, that's the Drupal Association, to kind of provide a framework, right? In the sense of, what are the values or principles that the project holds? What are we trying to solve for? And based on that, and what role does not just our contributor community, but the other communities that are within Drupal, whether that's the business community or the user community, what role do they have as well in that process, right? So that's not something that the contributor community can answer on its own. Whenever you have an organization and values and principles, those really need to be kind of driven from the top. They need to be true and authentic to the lived experience that people have within the project, which is why they're really often very hard to come up with, and I think that's where things are stuck right now. It's a very long way of answering your question, but the direct answer is come to DrupalCon and we'll talk more. So that's governance. So I think this, I've talked to a lot of folks, and I will occasionally have conversations with people about the community working group with people who don't know I'm on the community working group, and so I will get a very sort of unvarnished understanding of what they think the community working group is, and very often it's this, right? This is from Phoenix Wright, one of my favorite kind of bonkers series of video games, and so this is the judge sitting in their bench up on high, who's kind of like here to hear the evidence on both sides and, you know, hand down a decision, right? Decide who's right and who's wrong, right? And I think that's what a lot of people think that we do, but it's actually not our role to decide necessarily who's right or who's wrong. It's our role to help resolve conflicts between community members in a calm, measured, and respectful way, right? So, to be clear, we don't go out and proactively investigate community members. We do not contact law enforcement on behalf of community members. We're actually forbidden from doing so by our charter. And we don't respond to requests to take specific punitive action, right? So if somebody is like, I don't like so-and-so, please ban them. Like, we're not going to just do that, okay? We're going to say, well, let's talk some more and understand why you're frustrated, right? So we're not, as we like to say, we're not the Drupal police. And again, we're not here to decide who's right or who's wrong, so much as just making sure we're able to help people in our community work together in a mutually respectful way, right? So but I do want to be clear that while, you know, many of the items that we tackle are initiated by reports that are made to us, our process is not exclusively complaint-driven, right? So if we see that there's a lot of a certain kind of issue that's coming up, we're probably going to make some recommendations to go after the root cause of whatever that thing is, as opposed to, you know, just handling every single issue sort of whack-a-mole, right? So, again, you're not the Drupal judge. There's this great quote by Bell Hooks, which to me I think encapsulates sort of the central question that we deal with a lot. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, "For me, forgiveness and compassion are always linked. How do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing and yet at the same time remain in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed?" And this is what we deal with a lot, right? And I want to be really clear. You know, we're not everyone who engages in harmful behavior is going to be transformed. But we have a responsibility to show compassion, to hear them, to talk with them, to understand, and before, you know, and to try to see if we can get them to understand the impact of their words or actions or behavior and be accountable for them, right? At the end of the day, what I'm interested in, and the other folks in the community working group are interested in, are for people to basically just take responsibility for your words and actions and the impact they have on others, right? And so we're always trying to do that. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. So, digging into the nuts and bolts of our process, I realize that's very small text and probably very difficult to read for everyone in the room. But essentially the way it works is that when an issue is filed, when something is brought to our attention, whether that's through, we have an incident report form on Drupal.org, whether it's through email, or whether it's something that gets shared with us in our public issue queue, it goes on the agenda for our next weekly meeting. We meet once a week. We have a Google Hangout, you know, where we basically say, okay, what are the things that we're working on? What are the new things that have come in since, you know, last week? And if we have time, what are some of the kind of longer term things that we want to be working on? So again, to be clear, if this is a matter of that requires serious and immediate attention, we're also in Slack. We have our own private Slack, so we do have the ability to kind of meet and take action and do what needs to be done in between our regular meetings. Yeah, so I mean, essentially what we do then is we go through each issue, we discuss each item as a group, come to agreement on next steps, assigning someone or a couple people in the group to essentially follow up with the individuals in question, right? So, you know, if it's a dispute between two or more individuals, our general approach, again, is just to kind of gather as much information as possible from the involved parties, right? And in order to ensure that people are able to share their stories with us in an open and honest manner, we're maintain strict confidentiality. We do not share any names or other sensitive details outside the group without the permission of the person involved, right? So, once we have a sufficient level of detail, we meet then, again, as a group to decide how to proceed, right? So depending on the situation, this could involve, one or more CWG members providing mediation between the parties in conflict or suggesting ways that they might resolve it themselves. In cases where there's a very clear code of conduct violation, we will talk directly to the person or persons who engaged in the violation, try to help them understand the impact of their words and actions and to take responsibility for them. One way that can manifest itself in the case of a sort of really serious incident, or whether there's a kind of recurring pattern of a certain kind of behavior by an individual. So it may be that each individual incident is not necessarily severe, but the combination adds up. One way we might address that is through kind of an action plan. So that's, again, sitting down with the person, helping them understand, to much as we can, what the impact that their words, actions had on the other person, to try to get them to see that, to take responsibility for that, and say, what do you think we should do next, right? And that is a long and difficult, drawn out, and emotionally draining process. And sometimes it doesn't work, but when it does, it's amazing. The other kind of thing that might come in, we may receive an after-the-fact report about a situation that's already been resolved, but where one or more of the parties wants to basically have it on the record that this thing happened. So we'll review it, we'll decide whether further action or involvement is necessary, and basically just keep it on file for reference in case something similar happens in the future, or whether one of the individuals is involved again. So again, this all sounds very long and drawn out. That's intentional, right? Unless an issue requires immediate action, our process is designed to slow things down as much as possible and to enable resolutions that are as thoughtful and as permanent as possible. So we don't do all of this in the dark. We do share with the community. As often as possible, we post the minutes of our regular meetings. We put those up in a publicly shared Google Drive folder. Those have, again, redacted names and other personal information, And then we post that up on our Twitter account at Drupal Community. We will occasionally issue public statements regarding issues that are of importance or relevance to the broader community, sort of clarifying our understanding of the situation and what's going on. We will respond in our public issue queue on Drupal.org, to feedback and questions. So again, last summer, after the community conversations that Whitney helped facilitate, there were a number of pieces of kind of questions and feedback that were specifically directed at the community working groups. So we're like, okay, let's post those as issues in our queue and let's, respond to them. Some cases, we were like, well, people think it's this, but it's actually that, or okay, yep, this is an issue. We'd love to hear some suggestions, or even just asking for clarification. So we really are, as much as possible, trying to hear and listen to the community, the broader community at large. We present sessions at DrupalCon, here, events like this right now, to kind of help people understand who we are and what we do. We provide consultation and advice, as I said before, to the Drupal Association, other folks in the community who, need help with an issue or a conflict or directed to resources. As I was talking before about the community governance, we've been working with community members, we've been working with DREES and the Drupal Association to really try as much as possible to find that framework for ongoing evolving community governance. We'll be doing a workshop at DrupalCon Nashville. This has not been publicly announced yet, but it's in our minutes if you read our minutes, but very few people do that. So we'll be doing a workshop on Tuesday afternoon in Nashville. We're reaching out to and inviting, but then we'll also have open for registration. This is a workshop for sort of current and emerging leaders in our community to kind of provide some basic groundwork on sort of what does it mean to work in a team with other people, what does it mean to lead a team, particularly as it applies to not just leadership in general, but to people's very specific experiences in Drupal. That is going to be led by Adam Goodman, who is the incoming Drupal Association board chair, professor Northwestern University, where he runs the Center for Leadership there. So that is very exciting. It took a lot of work, but we finally got him to agree to donate some time. We'll also have a group of other folks who are established leaders in the community helping to co-facilitate that as well. So it should be an awesome event, and you'll be hearing more about it in the next week or two. And then the other thing that we do is we occasionally have conversations with our counterparts in other open source projects, right? We've been doing this for a really long time, longer than most projects. We don't necessarily do it better than other projects, but we have a lot of experience under our belt. And so occasionally, we will reach out and talk with folks, share ideas and experiences that they've had just with issues that have come up in their own projects, and that's something I'm hoping to get to do a lot more of as well. So some of the things that we have learned, some big lessons that we've learned in our work. It is really, really important to ensure that expectations are set and managed during the conflict resolution process. Communication is key. Again, if you have people coming in to the process thinking that their goal is to, essentially prosecute the other person, that's probably not going to be a successful process, and we need to make it really clear that, look, we're just here to hear your side of the story, hear your perspective, and then, we'll go and engage in that mediation, but it's not, it's not to prosecute the other person. So communication is really key there. Again, in order for any kind of mediation to be successful, all the involved parties need to agree to accept the outcome of the process, right? Which can be hard. It can be hard to admit when you've made a mistake. And so that's, but that is something that, if we're going to have a positive outcome, we need to have. And we can't, one of the things that we've learned is that we can't always assume that everyone going into the process is necessarily doing so in good faith. We've had times when people will come in and, say one thing, but not be really honest with us, but usually not with themselves either. So that's one of those things that we try to focus on. Escalation and appeals processes need to be well defined and well communicated. If we go through a process and someone is unhappy about it, they need to understand that this is how it works. If you don't like what's come out of this, you can take it to DREES, and DREES may decide to weigh in, or he may not. That is up to him. And I think the biggest thing we've learned over the last few years is that we need to keep talking with everyone. We need to keep doing sessions like this and explaining who we are and what we're about, and how our process works. And and we need to address questions and concerns, really valid ones that have come up about, like, what is our role in Drupal's governance structures? How are we accountable? These are all really important things conversations that we need to be having with the community at large. So I want to go back again to this unmet needs, right? The question of, because many of the issues, right, arise out of unmet needs and in our community, how can we, and these are things all of us have a responsibility, right, to help out with, right? We need to continue to streamline code and project review processes, right? We've made some great progress, but we're not there yet. That's empowering, enabling more people to conduct reviews, making the process more transparent to avoid, appearance of favoritism, making it easier for reviewers to find and work on unreviewed projects, and making it easier for reviewers to say, thank you for that review, I approve it, right? And improving our communication channels. We're going through kind of a shift in Drupal right now. We used to all be on IRC, and IRC was kind of clunky, but you had to have, you had to figure things and do things, and there weren't great clients on every platform. So now, a lot of folks in the community are using Slack, which is very familiar, very easy to use, but has its own challenges because it's not an open platform, and and it doesn't, because the community Slack is a free Slack. It only keeps the last 10,000 messages, which means basically any conversation disappears after a day or two, right? But we need to kind of continue to make it easier for newcomers in particular to have a place where they know where they can go and they can connect with other contributors, where they can get knowledge. I think we probably need to do more mixing in of some real-time technologies, not just using Slack, or the issue queues, but also bringing in some face-to-face video stuff. That person who you're having a conflict with in the issue queue, wouldn't it be great if you could just get on some kind of call with them and just talk it through, and maybe things would be a lot easier. And we also need to understand and appreciate that we're a global international community. English is not everyone's first language. And we have had several issues come up where somebody who is not a native English speaker has used English in a way that has come across as less elegant or more blunt, right? Because very often there's one example. There was someone who was a native French speaker, and they were making a request, and they're like, I'd like to demand such and such, and if you know French, right, that's actually a very polite way to ask. But if you don't have that experience, it's like, oh, why are you demanding this of me, right? It's like, that's that, and so those kinds of misunderstandings can arise.
Works for hand gestures too.
Yeah.
Because this is considered super rude in French. To us, it's like, come here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So that's important. Better communicating Drupal's direction, purpose, and technical roadmap. We talked a little bit earlier in the governance process about how we need to have a really good understanding of what Drupal's non-technical goals and principles are, but we also need to do a better job of creating easy-to-find summaries of active initiatives on Drupal.org, making it easier, like, hey, I'm new to Drupal. Where do I go to get involved? How can I do that in as streamlined and easy way as possible? We're doing these things. We need to continue to do them. And providing documentation and architectural overviews for future contributors. There's some Drupal systems, subsystems that there's not as good documentation for it. If you're somebody who's coming in who's brand new, you're going to have no idea what this thing is. So as much as we can, we need to just provide some some good high-level documentation and architecture for as many new contributors as possible. And again, I know this is stuff that people are doing, and what I'm saying is that we just need to provide those people with more support to do that. Mentorship. This is huge. We have a group of amazing mentors in our community. We have folks here who are helping out with sprints. Every time we go to DrupalCon, it's, let's help people get involved, give them that mentorship they need. What we need to provide more support is for mentors to be able to go beyond just onboarding newcomers and the core mentorship hours, but also find those people who have that passion, who have that commitment, pair them up with people for long-term, one-on-one mentorships. One of the things, when we did the survey back in 2016, we talked with a bunch of core contributors, people who are Drupal famous people, and almost every single one of them, when we talk with them, are like, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for so-and-so donating so much of their time and helping me out. We don't do a great job of recognizing and supporting that, and so that's something we need to do. We need to provide more non-code mentoring opportunities, right? Running a camp like this is a lot of hard work, and it would be great if we were able to have opportunities for people who may not be interested in doing code, but who want to learn how to run an event like this, and they could shadow and work with and learn from the people who have been running camps, and have a proven track record of success. So again, it's all about just providing that support, providing that training, and promoting those success stories, right, when they occur. I talked a little bit earlier about community leadership development. So this is the workshop we're doing at Nashville, and this is just the start, right? We need to continue to focus on developing skills like creative problem solving, conflict resolution, effective advocacy, and visioning to be able to give folks, a broader understanding of the Drupal community, its assets and challenges, understanding where you fit in the picture rather than just your narrow little piece of it, and really broadening and creating a greater network of leaders within the Drupal community. As someone who's kind of seen, what sort of, how the kind of path of leadership that folks have had within the Drupal community, we don't do a great job of documenting or communicating or establishing what that ladder looks like. So that's another thing I think we can do that will help out a lot. So these are some of the kind of new challenges that have come up for us that we've been seeing more of, and we need to work on more. We need better tools and procedures to address online harassment that occurs outside of project spaces, right? So this has become a huge issue, particularly social media in the last couple of years. There are people who take the position that no matter what they do outside of the project space, only their behavior inside the project space should matter. Now, this is clearly absurd because if you are harassing and attacking someone on social media, well, you can't then go and be like, oh, but let's go over here and pretend none of that happened and just work together. It does not work that way. This is not about free speech or political correctness. This is about treating those around you with basic human decency and respect, right? The shared values of our code of conduct apply regardless of your personal, political, social, religious views, but they're not an excuse to avoid accountability for the impact of your words and actions, right? We need to address the fact that there are larger issues with sexual harassment and assault that have been lying below the surface, and not just our community, but many open source communities and many communities elsewhere for years, and that they've gone unreported and unaddressed. I mean, what we know is that people often don't feel safe discussing these things openly because of the backlash they fear will result. We need people people to be able to feel safe talking about them. Otherwise, the problem is that if people don't feel comfortable reporting things that have happened, incidents that have occurred, we have no way of knowing that they occurred. We have no way to address those issues. And people will just know, hey, something happened, and nothing happened to that person. And it undermines all the faith, all the trust that folks have in the effectiveness of our code of conduct, of our working group structures. And it means that we're then less likely to get more reports. So we need to find better ways to make it easier and safer for people to report incidents of this kind of harassment. We need to keep better records of incidents that have occurred so that we can more quickly catch patterns of conduct. And then, I think we need to talk about the fact. I mean, alcohol is a component in many of the incidents that are reported to us. So we need to have, we need to take a look at what that impact is. We need to have an honest discussion about the fact that while many of us spend a lot of time together socially, we're also a professionally driven community of purpose. This is not just what we do for fun. This is our job. We get paid for doing it, and there's certain expectations that come from that, right? And then, we need to develop better relationships across projects to mitigate the impact of individuals who may engage in toxic behavior and then, when they're kicked out there, just jump to another project. I would love to see some kind of like United Nations of open source that could address, these kinds of cross-project issues. So, I'm going to close out here. This is panels from one of my favorite comic books. This is the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. She has all the powers of both squirrel and girl. And she is, what's wonderful about her is her humanity and compassion. She can defeat almost anyone, but she always tries, to find the humane way to solve problems. And so she's facing Victor Von Doom, Dr. Doom, who is for those who don't know Marvel, right? One of the greatest villains in the Marvel pantheon. He's a dictator who demands, complete loyalty, and he likes to name things after himself. So, I don't know if that's familiar to anyone, but in this case, she's up against him, and I'm going to just kind of come over and read it because it's too small. So. Doom desires nothing less than world domination. Unless you wish for the same, there can be no common ground. And, Squirrel Girl says, I don't believe in monsters. Beneath that cold metal mask, you're still human like me. I believe you'll listen to reason, and I don't believe that humans stop being human, even when they pretend to be monsters. Doom says, then you will die. And she says, okay, good, I'm trying here, but you're really not making this easy. And that's kind of how it is for us in the community working group as well. So, I am at time. Let's get started. Let's make this community a better place. We can't do it without you. Thank you very much. I know we're at time, but I'll stick around if folks have any questions or not. I'm okay with that.
What projects are doing a better job than they are outside projects?
So that's a hard question to answer because really, it's. I think I would answer a better job by sort of what is the outcome and the result, right? I know which projects have better documentation. I know which projects have better resources. Ruby's done a lot of work. We borrowed a lot of our documentation from, and I'm blanking on the name of the project, but it's another framework. There are folks out there. There's some amazing work coming out of Mozilla right now. They're doing a ton of research, and I think they're hoping to sort of establish some kind of common standards and best practices for folks to use. So, and there's actually a lot of work coming out of a lot of the projects that Google sponsors. Now, Google has a ton of resources, And they also have the advantage that they employ a lot of people who work on their projects. So if an issue comes up and it's someone on a Google project, chances are it's probably not. It's an employer issue, right? And so they can address it that way. So yeah, so it's all
It's a
over
big
the-
question.
It's a very big, very complicated question. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Yes.
I was in one of the governance discussions, and there was talk about like making every Drupal event adhere to the code of conduct.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that just raises questions between, I don't know, new, as a local Drupal organizer, what does that mean? Like, do I suddenly report to the community working group
Yeah.
every time we have a happy hour?
And I will tell you this, I would love to have every event have a consistent code of conduct. I do not want to be fielding issues from every single Drupal camp that happens. We had something occur last year, end of 2016. There was a camp in Germany that had, well, it's public, I'll tell you about it. They posted a picture. They were going to be distributing Playboy magazines in their handout bags to attendees. So Playboy magazine, by the way, in Germany still has nudity in it, and but they also run Drupal. So and the publisher was a sponsor and everything. So that issue, because of the time offset, I became aware of it at about 6 o'clock at night, reached out to the organizers. We didn't hear back from them until the next morning. By that time, it had completely blown up all over the internet. And they did the right thing. They did not distribute the magazines, but it's simply a matter of like time and resource. Like, we are 5 community volunteers who already have a ton on our plate. There is no way in heck that we are going to be able to address every single issue. What I would rather see is, one, is a commonly agreed upon set of standards for events and resources, places where camp organizers can go to get training and knowledge and information, so that when you're throwing an event, you have all the tools. You don't have to look for them, you don't have to find them, you don't have to come up with them from scratch. They're already there, and they're basically just handed to you and said, hey, something comes up at your event, here's the process you go through, here's what you do, and it's easy as pie, right? Awesome. Anyone else? Yes?
Talked a bit about like the role of the community working group, but like in situations like the one you described, and you mentioned we're not the Drupal judge. Isn't that kind of what the community wants? Sometimes
some
Drupal magistrate.
Yeah. Yes. Sometimes we're not the Drupal police. Sometimes we need the Drupal police. That's not what we are. And that's a great question. And I think that's something we need to, we've been talking about it, like, we don't want to become the Drupal police. So if we're not the Drupal police, if something goes down where it's like, yeah, we need somebody to be kind of the frontline enforcers, right? Whose role is that? We know what it looks like for DrupalCon, because that is an event that's run by the Drupal Association. They're fiscally and legally responsible for that event, so it is their fiscal and legal responsibility to ensure that that is a safe, well-run event, right? So if something comes up at DrupalCon, we have a really clear, line. If something comes up in Drupal community Slack, there's a wonderful, amazing group of volunteers who run that Slack, but it's not owned or run by any entity. So what is that? Who's the police for that? And there's great volunteer moderators, and that's the role they fill right now, right? But those questions are not always easily answerable, right?
And then what are the consequences?
Right. So, yeah, I didn't talk about that,
Yeah.
right? So we have a whole tool bag of consequences. It can range all the way from, hey, a warning, hey, knock that out, don't do that. That's our kind of our favorite one when that works. And very often that's enough, right? All the way to, you need to be removed from this space in the community because your presence in this space is, is damaging, right? And so, and again, right, that is a matter of community working group coordinating with whoever is responsible for that space, right? So if someone, if we recommend that someone, be banned from Drupal.org, that's something we have to coordinate with the association. Likewise, DrupalCon, if it's something like Drupal Slack, that's a conversation we have with the moderators of Slack. One of the most frustrating things, right, are and where there's a lot of challenges, like just online harassment in Twitter or Facebook or whatever. We don't have any control over those, and quite honestly, they're crap at dealing with it themselves. So, that's a place where we struggle. Yeah. So, we could say, look, hey, don't interact with this person anymore. Don't, you're out of Drupal Slack. But then they can just go on Twitter and just we can't stop them.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you told someone that they couldn't be a part of it, but then they
Yeah.
tried to come back under a different username or whatever? Like, how
Oh
do
yeah.
you even really
Yeah.
know?
People try. Oh yeah. We found out about that. We addressed it. Yeah. They're not participating anymore. Yeah, it's fun. Anyone else? All right. Let's go get what? When's our party?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
No, it's lightning
So we're going to
talks.
the party. Lightning talks. Go to lightning talks. Then we'll go to the party. Thank you.